some conversation. So I'll just begin with some overview thoughts for those of you that may not be aware of at least some of the details of what the governor has proposed, and then I'll look for questions and we can talk. Jobs that pay, schools that teach, government that works. I think if you haven't heard of that already, those three simple phrases are what sum up the governor's proposed budget plan. I think that everybody at this point, or most people, are aware that we face a significant structural deficit that has to be balanced as part of our proposed budget plan. It's been 7 long years in state government for those of us who have had to do budget work since we faced the Great Recession. We have, for the most part, used incremental approaches, kind of piecemeal, that haven't really acknowledged the real revenue challenges that we have. That approach really hasn't worked real well for us as a Commonwealth. And so as we stand here or sit here today, in the current year budget, we had to use more than $2 billion of one-time gimmicks, whether they were one-time revenue sources or one-time expenditure avoidance strategies. But our roughly $29 billion budget that we now have in place is balanced with about $2 billion that we won't have as we begin to figure out how to do our 15-16 spending plan. But as we put together a budget plan to try to address those revenue challenges, as well as expenditure challenges, we face a couple other deficits, and that goes to the heart of what the governor talks about most. When we talk about jobs that pay, it's this simple acknowledgement that if you look at our economic performance over the last couple of years, in net new job creation, we as a state ranked 50th among the 50 states. We were in a much better position not too long ago, but that's where we are today. If we aren't, as a state, doing the things we need to work with the local business community, to provide a trained workforce, to create a competitive business tax climate, to compete for new jobs and business investment, even if we do balance our budget for 15-16 in a structural and appropriate way, we're not going to stay or have a balanced budget for much longer. We need to grow our economy. We need to produce new jobs if we're going to succeed going forward. But maybe most importantly, it's the schools that teach. And over the past couple of years, if we often think of states as great laboratories of experiments to see and experiment with policies that work or don't work, cutting basic education funding has been a grand experiment in Pennsylvania that clearly hasn't worked. We have gone in the period of the last 4 years from being a leader on a national level. We were a state without peer, and if you look back over the prior decade, at least as measured by the standardized tests that we administer, the PSSAs, for those of you who are familiar with them, we were the only state in the country through that 10-year period who had increasing student test scores every year in every grade level tested in both math and English. The only state in the country that had that talking point. Maybe more importantly, during that time period, we reduced the gap for poor and minority students and their classroom peers by more than 50%. That was a track record that was providing huge dividends and returns to the Commonwealth and was feeding an economy that, while I just talked about us now being 50th, if we dial the clock back to 2010, we were among the 10 fastest growing states in net new job creation. That's how much those two pieces are interwoven, and that's how important those two facets are to getting back to a structurally balanced budget. So it's the governor's budget plan and what we're going to talk about today that tries to address all of those challenges, that tries to go back and find the resources necessary to put back the funds that we took away from local school districts, about $400 million in our proposed budget, a commitment to restore basic education funding by more than $2 billion over the course of the next 4 years, but to do it not by just throwing money at the school districts, but by going back and working with the school districts to not only make sure they have those resources, but to make sure those resources are invested in the most cost-effective, evidence-based strategies that are going to actually increase and improve student learning outcomes. So with our proposed funding increase this year, school districts are going to have to identify among 14 broad categories, again, of evidence-based approaches to improve learning, how they're going to invest those funds, how they're going to use investments in early learning programs, pre-K programs to make sure that 3- and 4-year-olds get the training they need so that when they start kindergarten, they start ready to learn. Reducing elementary class sizes, providing tutoring and summer school programs for students that aren't able to meet proficiency standards, and to try to do a better job to make sure not only do all students graduate and graduate on time, but they graduate with career plans in place, with 2+2 programs, if they're not necessarily going on to a 4-year higher education program like you offer here, but programs designed with post-secondary training and for technical careers. That we work with the business community, as many of you are here today, to make sure that we're tailoring both our job training programs, our high school or higher education programs to what businesses truly need, and do a much better job going forward of marrying our workforce development system to what our real employer needs going forward, and the employment needs and training needs that we need to really be competitive, again, as a state. We believe, and if you've heard the governor speak, that Pennsylvania has really been underperforming as a commonwealth for not just the last 4 years, but the last couple decades. And we need to take a much more critical look. Those assets that we do have, we are the Keystone State for a reason. We have rich natural resources. Everybody's heard a lot about Marcellus Shale, but in multiple energy sectors, we have the ability to become world leaders if we, in many of those fields of energy production, if we make the critical investments and if we make sure we have those synergies in place between what our businesses need to succeed and what we do as a commonwealth and what we do in both our basic and our higher education institutions. That's the essence of the governor's funding plan. What it means specifically for higher education, we do want to restore, again, deep cuts that were made to our public higher education institutions. We will do that over the course of the next 2 years. We have significant new increases for the first time in many years in our institutional assistant grant program that provides some limited subsidies to our private higher education institutions. We would take and invest $10 million to grow Governor Corbett's Ready to Succeed scholarship program. Again, a scholarship program we believe rightly targeted to middle class households to help students be able to afford the cost of higher education degrees and not leave those institutions with their degrees and just an unmanageable debt burden that might come with that education. But all of these things are interwoven. And maybe most importantly, also addressing some of the critical tax challenges that we do face. The revenue plan that I'm about to describe, will include increases to broad-based taxes that we believe will be necessary to fund those state commitments that I've talked about. But we believe we have to do that in a responsible way. First and foremost, right now, one of the reasons why we have literally the most inequitable local school funding system in the country is that our school funding system right now for basic education and providing resources to local school districts is over-reliant on local resources. The state only contributes a little more than a third of the cost, in sharp contrast to most states where the average state contributes nearly half of that cost. We need to right balance that again, and we would do that immediately with a pretty dramatic school district property tax relief. In Philadelphia, because they have a wage tax that's out of line, there the tax revenue we provide would be provided in a different way. But for the other 499 school districts, including everyone here in Lebanon County, it would be property tax relief. That property tax relief would be significant. For the average homeowner, it would reduce that local property tax burden for school district property taxes by about 50%. But more specifically and more importantly, it would provide the tax relief in a distribution formula it's weighted to provide the most tax relief to those school districts that need the help the most. It would be those districts that have the highest tax efforts or the largest number of poor students. What's that mean in Lebanon County? It means that the Lebanon School District would obviously be a bigger beneficiary than some of the other school districts. The tax relief would be significant for all school districts, but in a place like Lebanon, not only would the tax relief be sufficient to provide homeowner property tax relief, but there would be enough tax relief provided so businesses would actually benefit by some of that tax relief as well. And you would have some additional resources to help build the local economy again and put it in a much more competitive situation. What's this mean at the state level, though? And to be clear, it does mean we have to raise broad-based taxes. We would have to increase the PIT from its current 3.07% to 3.7%. But I would simply say to that in the next breath that at 3.7% we would still have the third lowest PIT rate among all the states that have a PIT. If you want to eliminate the 8 or 9 states that don't even tax personal income, we would still have among the 40th lowest PIT rates in the country. We would have to raise the sales tax from the current 6% to 6.6%. We would dramatically broaden the sales tax base to tax many services that aren't now taxed. But again, to look at our current economy and base our tax system on a 21st century economy, a sales tax base that would be more representative of how goods and services are traded today, not a sales tax base that's based on an economy we no longer have here or abroad. And finally, a business tax cut that maybe, again, to this audience, we believe would be the most significant thing we've done to really create a more competitive business tax climate, at least in the last 3 decades. We currently, with a CNI tax rate of 9.99%, have the highest CNI rate in the country. We have a tax system that allows significant deductions, so a significant number of corporations really don't pay that rate. But just having that broadcast rate as high as it is now means that particularly for large corporations looking to potentially locate in Pennsylvania, they might not even give us a second look because of that high tax rate. We would take that rate immediately, reduce it to 5.99%, and then in 2 more step downs over the following 2 fiscal years, reduce it to 4.99%. With that lowered tax rate, we go from having the highest tax rate in the country to the 4th lowest. Again, if you want to include about 6 states that don't currently levy a corporate net income tax, still among the 40 lowest states in the country in terms of a competitive tax rate. We think with that tax plan in place, we would be in a competitive or the most competitive position to fund our schools appropriately, meet our teacher education needs for higher education and workforce training, balance the structural and eliminate the structural deficit that we currently have for our general fund budget, and maybe most importantly, be able to grow jobs in our economy as we look forward. We think that's a plan that will help Pennsylvania reach its potential. We think that's the right thing to do, and that's why we call it Jobs to Pay, Schools to Teach, and Government. I'll stop there and hope to have some conversation.